Right, so this is the final countdown, the last panel discussion of the day, and it's titled Beyond Finance, Bitcoin as the Infrastructure of the Future. And moderating this one is our good friend, Sam Roberts from Cartwright in the UK. Sam, do you want to come up and take your seat? I'm thinking it's going to be the first one, but you know, like it's headshot bingo. Yes, there you go, right. Harald Rauter. Come on up, Harold. Part of the last. You guys should have beers for the last panel. I'll see if I can get some beers up here on stage for you. Alex, are you here? Alex Pilař, thank you very much for joining the panel here. And last but not least, Michael Howe is going to join us for this one. All right, guys, thank you very much. Enjoy the panel.
Thank you. And welcome everyone to the last session of the day. So we've talked a lot about, over the last day and a half, a lot about Bitcoin as a treasury asset, payment rail, collateral, Bitcoin treasury companies, etc. A lot about the financial side. So this particular session is trying to broaden things out somewhat to talk about things like energy, maybe human freedom if we can as well, those kind of things. And if you speak to people who have been in the Bitcoin space for some time, often you realize that, yeah, okay, it's nice that the number goes up. But actually what's particularly exciting is all the other benefits of having a sound money, which creates a level playing field for everyone that uses it. And that's what we're going to try and tackle some of today. So let's just do a brief introductions across. Some people have already been on stage, so you probably already see them. So over to you, Harold.
Yeah, thank you. So again, my name is Harald. I'm the Chief Growth Officer for 21 Energy. It's an Austrian-based company, and we focus strategically on Bitcoin mining as a core technology to enable different use cases, one of which is stabilizing the grids and making sure that energy is abundant and available and cheap. But on the other hand, we also use compute as a source for two-dimensional use. That means on the one hand, we monetize the compute, and on the other hand, we use the heat to heat homes and heat water and sort of provide additional value to the society through that measures.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Alex Pilař. I'm the co-founder and chairman of the InoWatti. And what we are doing there, we are trying to find large-scale opportunities to end the gas flaring in the oil wells, turn it into the power and use the power on the stranded, isolated locations to mine the Bitcoin, so to allow people to monetize what is today unmonetizable.
Hi, everyone. For those of you who I haven't met yet, Michael Howe from Bitwise, Head of Strategy in Europe. Bitwise is really proud to sponsor this event. If you don't know us, we have a range of ETPs and ETFs across the US and Europe, 15 billion in client assets. I don't have the credentials as similar to my fellow panelists here in terms of energy infrastructure, but I hope I can bring some value to this panel nonetheless.
I'm sure you got views, so look forward to those. So Sam Roberts at Cartwright, we help advise and implement asset strategies generally, but including for Bitcoin. So the title of this panel is Beyond Finance, Bitcoin as the Infrastructure of the Future, as you can see behind me. So the first question I have for the panel is, we've talked about Bitcoin as an asset and it's a network. So what does that mean in the context of this topic? What does infrastructure of the future mean in your eyes? How would you like to go first?
Yeah, I'm happy to take that. Well, this is where it becomes a bit philosophical as well, right? And we've talked a lot about the asset and the network and the asset are sort of independent, they need each other. But I think Adolfo made a really great point in the session before that we are actually living in international anarchy. There is no supranational power that coordinates all human action. We are very individually incentivized. We pack up in groups, in tribes. We call it the state. And then we have built, after World War II, a lot of infrastructure that tried to help and mitigate the conflicts that could arise from that. We now call it the UN and all derivatives of it, and we just see now, and we start to see that these coordination mechanisms are eroding and failing. So I think we're in a situation where we truly need a new proposition of how we can, in a complex, global, connected world, coordinate with each other. And I think it's one of the most underappreciated things about Bitcoin, the asset as well as the network, that we have one pulsating network, immutable, accessible to everyone, permissionless, non-confiscatable, incentivized through a token that sort of coordinates the action, that operates 24/7 around the clock globally, and I probably missed a couple of attributes of Bitcoin. I hope I caught most of them. That sort of builds the foundational layer for human-human interaction. And I think it's once we accept that as a premise, I think it becomes very interesting to say what are the emergent outcomes of this. And sort of we operate in a non-coordinated, chaotic world, whatever you might call it. But there is a thing. Oh my God, that is, oh wow.
Daniel delivers.
Applause for the person. Thank you very much. Thank you. No, it comes cool. Where was I? And now we start to build use cases on top of that, how actually we have a catalyzer that coordinates uncoordinated action into net positive societal outcomes. And I think the energy sector is one aspect where we can discuss that, but human rights is another. But I think this is a completely new dimension that is not, to bring it back to the asset side of things, that is not priced in whatsoever.
Well, I think you captured most of it. I will just add a few things. I think it's the first time when we are merging together the energy, compute, and finance. And we are not yet fully realized how powerful that settlement layer is and how we can innovate on top of it. And when we can, last 2 days, we spent most of the time talking about the assets and Bitcoin as an asset. But characteristic of the network are allowing many other innovations. I'll just mention one thing which is interesting, that we have the global units for measuring the speed, measuring the distance. And they are globally agreed, no one can manipulate them, no one can inflate them. 1 liter is 1 liter, no one can reduce it by 10% because of inflation, that's what it is. We don't have global standard to measure the value, to measure the wealth. We measure that in all kind of units and the currencies which are corruptible, which can be, we don't have that. And this network is giving us the chance, opportunity to think about, can we actually achieve to have the S for anything else we do on the planet? We agree the units for everything else, just not for the value. So can we actually use a network to build a globally agreed, stable standard, which no one can manipulate, no one can confiscate, censor, or debased? And can that become the way how we will look at the world in the future? So that's one commentary I wanted to add.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think those are all great points. Would you not agree, though, as well, that Bitcoin and what it brings is necessary but not sufficient? So its neutrality is both a strength but also a reality about Bitcoin. That means it cannot be used to completely coordinate across the world. It is dispassionate. It doesn't care if it's used or it's not used. It doesn't care who's using it. And therefore, for those reasons, it's a little hard to imagine that it's really enough of an infrastructure for what we need.
I think that's totally fair. That's why I speak of a foundation. Yeah. And I think this is where our individual possibilities, opportunities, and responsibilities come into play, because we're building use cases on top of it that sort of materialize the usability of that foundation and make it useful for you, and for me. And I think this is something that is so inspiring about this space as well, is that we are now in 25, and if you zoom yourself back into 2022, we were busy with FTX, Celsius, and BlockFi scams, and look where we are right now. So there's a lot of emergent properties around the network that bring nuances to the value creation and why this foundation becomes useful for humans.
I agree with that. If you think, as you mentioned, about institutions globally becoming more distrusted, seeming to erode in their efficacy, just the general outcomes of governments and the benefits that they bring to their populations or the lack thereof, you can't help but think that a neutral base layer that's uncorruptible is the right kind of foundation on which to build on compared to what we have today.
100%, yeah.
And so if we then, let's move that on to the energy market. So that's both of you are heavily involved in that. Michael, I'm sure you've got some thoughts on top. We'll make some up. So, and it's been mentioned, I think, the odd time today about the electricity grid, and tell us a bit about that. How to start with, because I think you're heavily involved. So you mentioned grid rebalancing.
Yeah.
This is, I think, a vastly undervalued quality of Bitcoin mining. Explain that, and then we can maybe talk a little bit about flaring and the benefits there.
Well, how ready are you still to digest some physics? But I think it's important. So I think the energy markets is one of the markets that I think will surprise society most about how it will interpret Bitcoin, and how it will add value to society, and how value will translate into societal benefits. So there's just a very simple reality about grids and how grids function. They all function on a 50 hertz limitation. So every electron across Europe moves in the grid with 50 hertz frequency. And this needs to be tightly managed, and I mean tightly, like really, really tightly managed. And because of the failures of central plannings, we have essentially stressed the system to a large extent by subsidizing renewable energy, and mostly intermittent energy sources like PV and solar PV and wind energy, that meets a system, a grid that is not ready to digest this type of complexity. So this translates into all kinds of challenges and all kinds of problems. One of which is that grid operators are not incentivized to transport as much energy as needed or as possible for the markets, but to keep this 50 hertz frequency as stable as possible. So they have the authority to cut off power generation from allowing them to supply their power to the grid, which means that we have a lot of assets, power assets, that could generate valuable power sitting idle, not being able to be monetized. So the first use case for Bitcoin mining is that obviously there is a need case for something that is geographically agnostic, that is relatively cheap in capex, that is relatively easy to operate, but that can monetize and build optionality for those asset owners to monetize this power that is sitting idle. Just that you have some sort of relation how big these numbers are. We are talking about 600 gigawatts of stranded power that is just sitting there, assets that are being built, that are waiting for grid connections, that have zero possibility to monetize their power. So
what's the equivalent of that in dollars or euros or pounds?
I'm not able to express that in dollars, but we're talking about 100 millions of households. So the Bitcoin network, I don't know, someone who might know this better than I do, but I think it's currently consuming the equivalent of like 20 gigawatts or 25 gigawatts of power. So we are looking at energy generation that is sitting idle, that is 10 times or 20 times the power consumption of the Bitcoin network. So next time you have the conversation that Bitcoin is bad for the environment, give them this number. So this is the first one. And the second one is that technically it would not be an issue to bring a lot of intermittent renewable power onto the grid, as long as the grid is able to digest the volatility that this creates. And that brings the importance and the spotlight back to what is called the so-called reserve markets. So these are markets that are essentially able to supply power when there's too little power because, you know, the sun is not shining or the wind is not blowing, but that are also able to take power out of the grid if there's too much power, so too much demand and too little, too much supply and too little demand. And these markets, they are necessary to be scaled, but there's no incentive to scale them. So we are also there looking at cheap and very effective off-takers and coordinators of taking power off the grid and supplying power to the grid, where Bitcoin mining can play an incredibly important role. And what we are looking at 21 Energy is really to combine those two use cases. Can we really use idle sitting power, stranded power, that we can monetize through Bitcoin mining, while at the same time providing the reserve capacity that will help to stabilize the grids. And this is a very, as you can see, this is a very delicate balance and a very difficult business case to describe. But the energy companies are waking up towards the fact that they are under-monetizing their assets, and that they are profitability constrained, and they're looking for new ways how this, the value of these assets and of the infrastructure can be captured better. And we're looking there at a multi-billion-dollar market. There's so much space for more competition, for more ideas, but they all build at the core on Bitcoin mining. And why do they do this? And this is my last sentence. It's because of the opportunistic nature of the off-taker. You cannot build a fridge there because a fridge needs constant power. A data center needs constant power. But a Bitcoin miner can be interrupted at any given time. And that's such a beautiful feature of the technology in itself, and it makes it so pristinely useful for those two use cases.
I remember actually who mentioned it earlier. Freddie was talking about how much wasted energy we have, or wind is basically turned off, and I think the number is something like £1 billion a year is wasted basically, and not because it's not used to mine Bitcoin, which is quite a large number. Alex, about the flaring, I think you mentioned that's particularly you involved. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I think it's a subset of what has been just mentioned. I think the key line is there, and it's unfortunately it's going super slow, but energy producers and distributors, they are slowly learning that they have to stop thinking about selling the energy and to start thinking about monetizing all assets related to the production and distribution of energy. They have a huge opportunity to improve their P&L very quickly if they are more open-minded about it. Flaring is one example. I will come to it in a second, but I'll give you another one. So we have a case right now, which we are talking to one project in Oman, and they build a power generation unit because you can't rely on the grid in many countries. Uptime of the grid may be 70–80%, so you have to build your own power generation for production. And unfortunately, the refinery they were supposed to sell the electricity to will be 4 years delayed. And now we have the 30 megawatts power station. Next, you are flaring all the gas you need to actually start producing power, but there's no off-taker to help them. And for miners, which are fully containerized, to go into similar projects for 6 months is maybe a little too short, but a year, 18 months, 2 years is absolutely no problem. And we are talking to these guys who never crossed their mind. They could have the intermediate, someone stepping in, bring the whole power generation unit to the sweet spot, start generating the P&L, have the off-taker, who can actually then decommission in the stages as you will bring your refinery up, because we can take the 10–20% containers off as they are slowly building up the capacity, so that asset you build, this power generation, can run on the full P&L from the day one, if you use smart way, the capacity which miners can easily deliver. And this is a very simple example, which when we explained that to the guys on the board, they were kind of, yeah, so I think there's obviously very quickly intellectual connection. Problem is that oil and gas industry in this case is very risk averse, and to connect this industry with the cyberpunk psychopaths is really difficult. So we are bridging, they're trying to convince there is a collaboration there. But this is one of the examples where energy producers and distributors should start really thinking about the monetizing whatever assets is not utilized. Wherever you have imbalance, I'll give you a hint, wherever there's imbalance between the production and consumption in energy, miners. First thing should be miners. Can I resolve the imbalance by bringing the miners into it? Because they can be switched off without any problem. If you have the gas power unit, it takes hours to bring it to the production when you can actually connect that to the network. If it's a whole plant, it can be 7–8 hours. If they are already up and they are mining, you can turn them and connect them to the grid in minutes. So there's a lot of opportunities there. And I always surprised how how bad we are explaining that, and how slowly uptake is on the side. And on the flare, just quickly, I think it's known story for years. If you are pumping the oil, there's associated gas. You have to either sell it or you have to burn it. You have to flare it. You can't, otherwise it will kind of explode. And if you are isolated commercially, you are too distant from the grid, you are too distant from the pipes, you have no way how to monetize that, you just burn it all. That's what they do all the time. And there's loads of volume of that being burned. And by the way, when you take that gas and pump it into the normal gas turbine, you eliminate 75% of emissions too, on top of that. So actually, it's the first carbon negative industry, because we pretty much know we don't buy the bloody credits. We really eliminate physically the emissions from the world if we do that, right? So that's what we are involved in. At the same, logically, it clicks quickly, convince the people to do that, actually go and implement that. That's a hard bit, which we are working on.
Harald and Alex, isn't the elephant in the room, though, that Bitcoin miners, although they can be switched on and off, they're much more effective when they're not switched on and off and they're run consistently, firstly. And secondly, isn't there a stronger bid for these energy producers from AI companies to build data centers? And don't you see some evidence for that already in the market with pivots from like Core Scientific or Riot towards AI capabilities?
I have this question a lot, and always the same thing. Hey, if you have some goodness you want to do the world, put your good into the container, bring it to the desert where we have the power, and we'll connect you as anybody else, as the miners. No one ever turn up. So it's really hard to find alternative industry where you would so mobile and able to bring it to anywhere on the planet and connect it. AI is a fully blown data center. You can't maintain that easily if you're in the middle of the desert. The Bitcoin mining, it's a really very primitive engine. You don't need data center infrastructure, firewalls, storage, none of it. You just plug it in, plug it off, that's it. Very simple. You can have the guy with a screwdriver to maintain that. So yeah, if anybody has anything else they want us to power up, bring the container in, it's very easy. But no one is doing that.
I think, can I just add to that? I think it's a super fair point and it will become relevant, but only for mining operations where there is essentially baseload power available. Yeah. So if we look into the US, and I think the European situation is very, very different, we don't see these mega power purchasing agreement contracts in Europe that we see in the US for gigawatts of power. And I think this is where Bitcoin mining in the short term, and I don't know what short term actually means in years, will become extremely stressed because those PPAs are starting to run out and they will definitely not be renewed because there is a more premium service that now demands this power. And I would add, this is exactly the function that Bitcoin mining should have. It should be marginalized. It should not be competitive as an off-taker to other utility services. And I mean, then it's a conversation. If ChatGPT, your spaghetti recipe, is more valuable than protecting the network, that's a different conversation. But I think this is where we will see, I think, a lot of mining operations in distress. And I think this is also why I expect hash rate consolidation in the years to come for different reasons. And I think this is even more of a case why we should use or look into arbitraging power opportunities with Bitcoin mining. Because I just give you two numbers. To do this negative grid balancing, just off-taking surplus power from the grid is essentially an uptime equivalent of about 5 to 10 minutes a day. You're monetized, though, you're compensated for providing the reserve capacity plus actually the off-taking of the power, which is all denominated in fiat. So technically, you could use for this type of service as a fleet of S9s that you buy for €3 a piece if you're expensive and get ripped off. And you would still be massively profitable. Yeah. So I think this is exactly the nuances where Bitcoin mining will always have a place, and the future of mining will be most profitable there, where we can really layer different revenue streams on top of each other that have very low beta. Some are Bitcoin denominated, some are fiat denominated, heat reuse on top of it. because that is the resilient hash rate that that will survive any hash rate bear market or any Bitcoin bear market. And I think this is the opportunity for Europe, because integrating Bitcoin mining into the energy systems will provide, I don't know how much quantity in terms of hash rate, but it will be extremely resilient hash rate. And I think this is the bullish case for mining in Europe.
I was going to move on to the next.
Yeah, no, just to add to one thing. I think there are only 3 stable modes how to mine the Bitcoin. First is full integration into the grid, where you serve as a demand. You help to manage the demand, and you switch over needed, and you are compensated for that. Fully integrated. Second is island mode, when you build the actually power and location where it's stranded, energy is stranded, unused, can't be utilized. That's a stable. And then it's just microgrids, maybe heating generation, very small in the grid, but minor subscale things. Anything between these 3, among these 3, goes always the same way: panic, chaos, and moving somewhere else. We saw the Paraguay exit to Ethiopia, then Ethiopia exit to this country, and it keeps going on and on and on. People kind of have the very flat learning curve. So either you are legally integrated into a grid and you have the contract to manage the demand, good. You are isolated, stranded, isolated from everything from the grid, good. Or it's a small, like the maybe also the renewables integration and so on, but everything else is very scary. And we see many people losing a lot of money by trying to play a little in the shadow zone, gray zone, and I think industry need to grow out of it and mature and stop doing that.
Thank you. Okay, so I've got 4.5 minutes, so I'm going to try and squeeze 2 questions in. So maybe fairly quick fire answers. So the first one is to touch on the sort of the human freedom side. So it may be that I'm biased living in the UK, but we seem to be in a rather, let's say, tricky political environment at the moment. So any thoughts on how Bitcoin can help, obviously not just the UK, around the world, can help with the political environment that we may see evolving over the next few years?
I start. So the freedom is actually one reason why I'm so excited about the Bitcoin, why I was excited at the very beginning. Freedom it can give us. If I will zoom in on the UK situation elsewhere, I think the Bitcoin, was the inspiration for the stuff we call today the freedom tech. So technology which helps our privacy, which helps to protect our freedom. And just it was 3-4 weeks ago, we had the first ever consumer electronics product being introduced on the market, which has an open source, auditable, secure element chip, first on the planet. And you have them all in the mobiles. That's where your password is stored or your biometrics. And that was a big step forward, creating the technology full stack from the hardware to software, which is open source, auditable, no backdoors, and you can validate that you are in the safe place. Anybody has a guess what this consumer electronics product was 4 weeks ago? Introduced first on the global market. Who knows? No, you can't say. Tropic, yes. It was Trezor 7, which is the first hardware wallet which has inside Tropic Square's chip, which is open source, auditable, ever. No one else producing it on the planet. So I think that Bitcoin invention and that ethos of open source, decentralized, eliminating third parties, eliminating everything permissionless, is spreading broadly into the hardware layers. We have the open socials, Nostr, Mastodon, networks which are not, you can't censor them. And I think that's where I'm really optimistic about, that the Bitcoin original sentiment is spreading around, and the guys are so smart. We have somewhere around maybe the Honza is over there, CEO of the, stand up. That's the CEO of Tropic Square. The guys who built the first open source auditable chip. I know I'm repeating myself because it's important. So I think that's where I'm always optimistic about, that we are building the technology which allow us to protect our privacy, and is giving us a chance to fight what's happening in the UK or other places if we are smart about it.
And self-custody of Bitcoin will be an important part of that as well. Michael, Harald?
Yeah, so I guess I've got some ideas which I'm very bullish about, but I think are highly unlikely. So Firstly, just improving political situation. Clearly, like take the UK, and in fact, I think most of the Western world, extreme inflation in recent years. So just in terms of fiat debasement, Bitcoin could be used as a protection against that. And surely that's going to make us all feel better about our daily lives. Certainly does make me feel better. And then extending that to the government, again, certainly thinking about the UK government, this is miles and miles away. But some kind of Bitcoin strategic reserve for similar purposes. The UK and most Western economies are, incredibly indebted, struggling to cope with their spending commitments and their tax-raising abilities. And so maybe if you just do the thought experiment, reversing 5 years even, and imagining we had a Bitcoin strategic reserve, how beneficial that would have been.
Yeah, although I'd argue that the best Bitcoin strategic reserves are the ones held by individuals and companies and charities and private organisations, much more decentralised. But yeah, at least then they may understand Bitcoin, hopefully, which may be a start. I'll just wrap it up then with a final question. So, as we all know, Bitcoin can fix an awful lot of problems, particularly around that foundation level and what it can incentivize and lead to. But there must be at least one problem that it can't fix. So, any thoughts on what that might be?
I guess I can have a go. And we've seen this a little bit through Bitcoin's history. Can't fix human nature, can it? We're all, like animals acting on our emotions, and that could be, in the kind of crypto speculative sense, buying high and selling low, behaving out of fear. Certainly can't help that. Bitcoin's completely dispassionate. Isn't there a saying that everyone gets to own Bitcoin at sort of the price they deserve? I think that's the saying. So some dynamics like that, fear and greed, I don't think Bitcoin wants to play a role. I don't think it should play a role, and it's certainly a human condition that Bitcoin's not going to fix.
No, I agree. I think Bitcoin can give us the fair game, but it will not give us the fair players, because we will stay as we were. They will never change. And I think there is I think the Bitcoin, as any other technology, it's neutral. It can be used for both good and bad. I think there is more good than bad on the world, not by much. There is more good. So it's up to us how we'll use that, and if we will be able to take the decentralized permissionless network and help us to build a civilization which will be using that foundation to become the better. But the human nature will stay the same.
Yeah, I agree. I think Bitcoin doesn't fix human complacency. And I think there's something very powerful about we're all Satoshi, except for we know who. It comes with a responsibility. By using the network, by engaging in the network, we make it more resilient. We bring to the network our ideas that maybe no other person would have thought about. And through the diversity of the ideas, we make the network more resilient, and we make it more useful and more meaningful to more people, which is part of the logic of how we actually grow and adapt Bitcoin. So I think with the tool comes responsibilities, and I would wish that everybody sort of, wouldn't look left and right in terms of who is building what can be useful for me, but let's get our hands dirty and do it ourselves.
Yeah, excellent, thank you. I think we had a little bit of time for questions.
Yes, because Matthias is supposed to come in and give closing remarks, so he is there, yes, right, okay, excellent. I don't have to waste too much time then. So yeah, if anybody's got any questions that they want to fire at the final panel, raise your hands now. Yes, gentleman here.
Hi, Jenks. Thank you very much for all of that. It was very interesting. I have only one question, because we know that the world of mining have one problem, and it's called Bitmain. What you are thinking about the centralization of production of ASICs and how you are thinking it should be approached? Alex mentioned about the Tropic Square. I think that kind of approach is nice, but it's very complicated according to the ASIC production and, of course, Taiwan problem. So how are you thinking about that?
Yeah, it's true. This is the elephant in the room, yes. But I think also, that there is clear indication that there is also movement into the other direction. I think Jack Dorsey's project is a step into the right direction. We know it still has quite a few hardware problems, but I think hats off to him that he puts himself out there to make this thing, or to allow the community to make this thing better. But we also know from other producers, of hardware producers, that there is a change in thinking about the industry. We are now reaching the 3 nanometer limit. We know that the next generation of miners will only be a marginal improvement in terms of performance, but it will be a massive improvement in terms of CapEx requirements. So I think these producers also see the limits of growth in terms of intensified mining farms. So the future is decentralized, modular, and multifaceted. And I think the BitX is going in the right direction. We're seeing chips that are specifically used for heat reuse. And I think it's, again, a bullish case for Europe, because ironically, we have a competitive advantage by having done nothing. Yeah. So we've missed the boat in terms of power generation, almost of the big farms. But now we have the opportunity of actually leapfrogging this development and integrating very modular infrastructure very resiliently into the energy system. So, and I think that will give rise to new opportunities, new players. There were the attempts in the past with Intel and Co. It hasn't quite worked, but I think the macro constraints sort of make it necessary that producers also think about growth into a different direction, and a bit more nuanced than they did until now. And that makes me actually bullish for the hardware space.
I don't have much to add, but the one thing that, for example, Brains, the company, they do develop the firmware which can replace the original firmware. So there are attempts above the hardware level to bring the more transparency into it, open source, because we know the tricks from 10 years ago when they were taking 10% of the hash rate away. So I think that it will be fine. It's no doubt the risk, and I'm looking on these projects too, see what they will bring. I think next will be important. If Jack will deliver what looks like a good chip, we will see. It would be great. I don't know.
I'll throw a question at you. I don't see any other hands going up. So, we follow the price. When number go up, people with not just in dollar terms, but hash rate. And we look at, I think, did we peak out at 1.2, 1.3 zettahash, right around there? And everybody's, kind of, this is amazing, like the world's most decentralized supercomputer. But is it a case of less is more? Are we thinking about this the right way? I think you mentioned earlier, Harald, or maybe Alex, the quality. Should we be looking at the quality of the hash rate other than the quantity of the hash rate?
I think there are different ways to look at it. I mean, we all know that market price and energy implied fair value for Bitcoin, it's always kiss and touch. They always diverge, and then they come together, and then they diverge, and they come together, and they've never been more divergent than they are now. So one will have to give. It's either price corrects upwards to justify that hash rate, or hash rate will come down. So my bet is somewhere on something in the middle to resolve that predicament. But I think the whole story is really a bit more nuanced than that. I think there's a lot of latently distressed hash rate that will come offline for different reasons, one of which I've mentioned before. And I think it's a good thing, because it makes business cases like energy system integrated mining just much more profitable, and this is exactly fair game. But I think we also look at hash rate that is not necessarily driven by profitability. So if you look at hash rate that essentially is happy to mine every 500th block just to clear their payments and hedge their Swift system risk. I think these are hash rates and dynamics that we have not seen so far, and there are new players and actors that that are not necessarily only economically driven, but geostrategically driven. And we don't know how much of the hash rate actually could be attributed to that. So I think it's a very complex game, but I think not knowing the game is good because it essentially forces you to prepare for the worst hash rate bear cases. And that makes the case again for multi-revenue, highly integrated mining operations.
I think the trend to watch is all publicly listed miners in the US, all big miners. You can see them migrating to HPC, which is high performance computing, which means AI. So that's where we need to watch because there are some huge contracts on the market, which either will be migrated to the AI or maybe continued. But that's, I think, which will probably answer your question, Daniel. What will future look like? That's biggest, but definitely by far the biggest trend which we need to watch. Good thing is that everybody's blaming AI because of the wasting the energy, not Bitcoin mining anymore. So we are kind of off the radar for a while. But this trend, I think, will decide if the hash rate, because no one knows what the right hash rate is. It's definitely high enough to secure us against anything, but what is the right level? So I think this will be the biggest trend of the next 6, 12, 18 months. To see how that exit of the big players from US and migration to the AI will impact the mining industry.
Great. Thank you so much, guys. Thank you for hosting the panel.
Thank you very much.
Big round of applause. Don't forget your beers, guys, if you didn't finish them already.